Hello again, and welcome to podcast number 17 today. It's great that you tuned back in. I've enjoyed very much sharing the things that I learned while in the hospital and having a near-death experience. And today I want to talk specifically about medical servants. By this time, of course, we've early on established that my greatest insight while in the hospital was that I needed to see God more as a servant of servants than anything else. I know He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It says that a couple of times of Him. But Jesus said the greatest of all was the servant of all, or the slave of all. And so when you think of God, He's obviously the greatest of all, so He must be the greatest servant of all by definition. Many titles are ascribed to God, many of them speaking of His power or some other aspect of Him. But the one that really gets down to His heart is He's simply a servant. And that's what Jesus said that He was. And so I thought about the medical servants. I was served in so many ways by so many different people while in the hospital for 23 days. And so I thought about the conversations I had with some of them and their attitudes about serving. I remember a young man named Jason. He was one of the night crew, a tech, as we would call him, or a nurse. And so he would come in and take care of me, whatever I needed. And some of that was not too good as far as I'm sure he was concerned. But at any rate, he talked to me about life in general. We talked about spiritual things. He asked me the question, what do you think is the greatest purpose that we have? I thought about it a moment and I said, well, to first of all, get right with God. That's number one. But then after that, to be a servant, because that's the greatest thing of all. And so we've got to discover our gift sets and how we can serve best, and then devote our lives to serving as many as possible as well as possible. And so that's sort of what we came up with. And so I've looked back and think about all the medical workers that I've known through the years, many friends, many relatives, and I've always had them as esteemed heroes. But I think it became even more that with the COVID dynamic that started in 2020. At that time, nurses and doctors were putting their lives on the line. There wasn't any type of vaccine at that time in the first part of it. I think about our daughter by marriage, Joy. She's a pediatric RN and worked with a lot of women giving birth who had COVID. And sometimes if there were no babies being born, she would be called down to the emergency room and she would work in there with COVID patients. And so she was putting her life on the line. And so all of that became very real. I especially remember football season that year. I like to watch the NFL and I've got my teams that I favor, et cetera, that I won't go into. But at any rate, at the Super Bowl, they had health workers that were there who had gotten the vaccine, and they invited them to be special guests. We'd been watching games go on all year without anyone in the stands, and yet here we had these medical workers, and I remember during the Super Bowl, before it started, they panned the camera over to those workers, and I remember I couldn't help crying. It was just so touching to realize that these people were putting their lives on the line for people who were fighting for their life. And as I fought for my life, there were many people who served me. They served in ways that, frankly, I would have a hard time serving. The nature of my reaction to the chemo was such that I had severe bouts of diarrhea. I had projectile vomiting. I mean, it was a mess, and someone had to clean that stuff up. I couldn't move. And so very cheerfully, these workers were coming in and cleaning me up, and I made the comment many times after that I had more adults change my diaper when I was an adult than when I was a child. That was a bit humbling, but I was amazed at how much they were willing to do and do it very cheerfully. The hospital I was in has a great emphasis on doing things cheerfully and having a bright, happy attitude if you're working for them. And I would have the head nurse come in occasionally and ask me how it was going, how were the nurses and the other medical workers and their relationship with me during that time. All of the surveys that I was asked to fill out, it all focused on how people were serving, what was their attitude. And so I remember Mark Mancini, who got me in touch with this hospital to start with, he said they make you feel like you are their only patient. And pretty much that was true all the way across the board with every worker who served me. And so as all of this was going on, it was a medical school connected with the hospital, University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, largest in the state of Texas. And they have as an emphasis serving cheerfully. And so they also, because it's a teaching hospital, have students come in and interview the patients. And the first time that happened, I thought I was going to die. I was amazed that the teacher would do that, but the professor came in and introduced the students and said this was a part of their curriculum. And so I got to talk to a number of them, even though I felt horrible. Somehow God gave me the strength to go ahead and hopefully communicate in a way that made sense. But I shared with them that their cheerful attitude was a huge thing, because I remember reading an article one time about a hospital that had 2 floors of cardiac patients in serious condition. And one of the floors had very, very upbeat nurses and workers. The other floor did not have as many like that. And the comparison of the statistics was a bit shocking. You had a much better chance of surviving if you were on the floor with the happy workers than you had on the other floor. So the death rate, the survival rate, was affected a lot by the attitude of the workers themselves. So I shared that, and of course, they already knew that. That's how they had been trained. But I went ahead and talked to some others about a couple of related topics. I do remember, though, I want to mention one doctor, Dr. Fuller. He would come in along with a team that was serving me, and yet he would come in by himself, and sometimes we would talk as much as 30 minutes. He would just stay there and we'd talk. And he allowed me to be a part of making several decisions about the next step to take, and we broke with protocol at least 3 times that I can remember. And I just told him, Doc, here's how it looks to me, knowing my body for nearly 80 years, here's what I think. And he would allow me to give my opinions, and we broke protocol several times because he was listening and spent the time to listen. I was amazed he spent so much time talking with me. I remember another doctor who was taken off of my case to serve other people, and yet she studied my particular reaction to that chemo and came back in and talked to me and patted me on the arm while she was explaining it. And she had spent quite a bit of time researching it, even though she was no longer on my case. So I appreciated the great servant hearts that I saw. Then, as I talked to the medical students, besides telling them to stay happy when they're around students, no matter what they might feel like, stay happy around us, I had a couple of other things that I brought up. One of them was helping people to do some preventative stuff. And exercise is high on the list of that. One of the reasons I survived is because I walk a lot, and I walk very fast as exercise. I've always had prayer walks, but in 2020, when I was in isolation anyway, I got out and walked just for exercise and started walking farther and farther and faster and faster. And so when I went into the hospital, I was in probably as good a shape conditionally as anyone my age would be. Probably top 5% of the nation would be my guess. but that was certainly used by God. Now, all of the prayers of hundreds or thousands of people, I think, was the ultimate answer. But being in good condition was very important, and so I told them, somehow encourage those whom you serve to really get themselves in shape physically. You know, in 1 Timothy 4:8, the Bible is not a book telling you how to be in good condition physically, but it says in 1 Timothy 4:8, for physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. But physical training is of some value. That's what he says there. And certainly I've found that to be true in my case. So we talked about exercise. And then I talked to them about also encouraging people to eat the right food. Even when COVID hit, the people that had deeper issues like diabetes or being overweight, that increased your risk of dying tremendously. And so even what you do to take care of your body is fundamentally important. I happen to not only exercise, but I eat well because of my wife. She's a very healthy eater, a very healthy cook for me. And so without her, I probably would not have done nearly as well. But at any rate, we eat well, we eat healthily. And my wife is one of these, if I gain 20 pounds, I start thinking about dieting. If she gains 2 pounds, she goes on a diet and loses the 2 pounds. She's amazing that way. But at any rate, eating the right thing is very important. I read a book one time called None of These Diseases, written by a doctor, and he talked about the health benefits of eating a certain way, and he used the Bible in that, the Old Testament in particular, although not everything about food laws has to do with health. Some of them certainly do. And so I read that book, and it encouraged me to want to eat the right way. But I wish that doctors could actually be more insistent on people exercising and eating correctly. I know back when my wife was pregnant with our son, who's now 54, she had a doctor that was very strict. And back then, evidently, you could get by with it. But he had a rule. If you gain over a certain amount of weight when you're pregnant, he would drop you as a patient. Now, you'd probably be in court if you did that today for discrimination of one sort or another, but he did that back then. And so my wife had to watch how much weight she gained before Brian was born. And I wish it could be like that because it makes such a difference. I remember once in Boston back in the late 90s, I was at a wedding and there was a young woman, the wife of a doctor there. I knew both the doctor and his wife well. And she was telling me about this doctor doing a lot of research on diet. He had a lot of patients that were diabetic and had other issues. And so he came up with an eating plan that he said would be the most natural in the world. If you were dropped in the middle of nowhere in a jungle, you would eat meat and vegetables and fruit. That's what you would eat. And that's about it. You wouldn't have all of the types of starches and carbohydrates that we eat a lot of now. And so she said that he had gone on that diet because he got sick easily. And then, especially if it got run down, and doctors do get run down if they work the schedules that many do. But she also had lupus as a fairly young woman. But they went on this eating regimen of nothing but meat, vegetables, and fruit. No starches and no sweets. And so in 2000, the year 2000, I did that. I did it for 1 year with one exception. And I said, if I go to eat with someone and all they have is a starch, and I went and ate with someone that had only spaghetti and meatballs. And so I ate that to be polite and to be friendly and to not in any way disturb them. But that was the one exception in an entire year. And I lost weight and I was eating all the time. I just ate the right stuff. I kept losing weight. I finally started at the end of that year eating the normal way again and gained the weight back, unfortunately. But during that 1 year, I was losing weight and eating a lot, but I only ate those items. And I slept well. I felt great. It was incredible how all of that actually worked. But I'm not trying to push that eating regimen. I'm not on it myself now, but I try to stick pretty close to it. But as I explained to the medical students at UT Southwestern, you want to be happy when you're around patients, and that will help them. I'm confident it helped me when I was in the hospital. You want to also try in every way you can to get people to exercise and to eat healthy foods. That is one way that you can serve as you are in your profession and go into your profession full time. So those were some of the things that I shared with them. It was a very interesting time for them to come in and want to interview me. We also talked about spiritual things, and we sometimes prayed together. I was amazed at some of the spirituality of some of those students that came in. But at any rate, I appreciated greatly, and I let them know how much I appreciated their heart to serve. And all of those who served me encouraged me and helped keep me alive. God used them in my life to help keep me alive. So medical servants are heroes to me. They saved my life as God answered prayers of many, and I am very grateful for that. So I just wanted to have one episode to express my gratitude to all those who serve in the medical field. You are my heroes. Okay, now we come to the fun part of episode number 17. That's where I get to have a very special guest. And since this one is about medical workers, I have one with me who's also a very dear friend of mine. Mike Eisenberg is a physician assistant, and so he can ask me questions, and I may not have answers, so I'll ask him some. But Mike, it's great to have you. Thanks for coming.
It's good to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Good. So, knowing what I said, what questions would you like to start us off with? And then we'll see where we go.
Well, of course, as a PA, my first question as a medical worker is along the line of what we as Christians who are medical workers can do to serve people while we're doing our job. It's not something we're always able to do, is open the spiritual conversations, but being there and being ready. But we hit those times where we can tell people's lives are deeply touched, and it's really interesting to see how vulnerable people become to us.
Right.
And we realize there's a window here if we choose to walk or climb through it to talk about spiritual things. So just the general question of how can we best serve our patients?
That's a good question. I know just from the friend side with you, being able to call you, and if you're in an appointment, you'll text me quickly and say, in an appointment, I'll call you when I can, and then you always call. Some of the questions you've answered for me with some of my weirdness even is always very reassuring. So just having a friend, and those of us in the church have friends that are medical workers, if we can call you and get not only a medical perspective, but a Christian perspective, especially you know the Bible well, and we're on the ministry staff for many years and teach Bible and all of that. But getting a medical perspective and the Bible perspective is super encouraging to me. You've been a great friend to me, although we don't get together all that much. You've been a great help to me. I, 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 just think looking for the openings is not sure how much I mentioned this in the series, but there were a lot of healthcare workers there that were anxious to even pray with me or whatever else. I don't know. I don't know what the rules are for medical people. How much can you bring things up?
I Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't
Mhm.
know that there are rules.
Mhm.
I've always just said when the door opens,
Mhm.
I can always ask them, "Do you mind if I ask you this?" Or there have come times when I've been able to say, "Would you like to pray?"
Mhm.
Because I really get the sense
Mhm.
that they will say yes to that. I've never had anybody say no.
Mhm.
Now, I have not asked a ton of people that,
Right.
but I probably should ask more.
Yeah.
I probably should look at that.
Well, I wondered if you came from a Christian perspective and just told them that I'm coming from personally a Christian perspective. So if there's anything that I can do from that perspective, as well as the medical,
Hmm.
to serve you, please let me know.
Yes.
I mean, that shouldn't be offensive to anyone.
No. No.
And one thing I have noticed as a preacher, there are a lot of people that aren't very religious that suddenly get that way when they think they're about to meet God.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yeah. I'm not. It's interesting. I'm not in the position where I see people at those
Right,
terminal positions very much. I'm
right,
I'm practicing family medicine,
right.
and if I see someone, and I have seen people who very quickly become terminal and even
Mhm,
pass away, but they get admitted or referred, and
mhm,
they're out of my care. Um, but as people age, more and more, I'm seeing
mhm.
people that are older. I know that people are always thinking
Right.
about that. Um, Now, you mentioned something about talking to people. I've noticed that some people ask me questions. Um, Members, when we're in fellowship,
Mhm.
they'll ask me questions. I've never minded that. People are really hesitant to do that, though.
They are.
They don't want to take advantage
Right.
of me. That was one of the things I was happy to be able to serve in when I came into the position to be a physician
Mhm.
assistant. I thought, I'm glad I can serve this way. I'm
Right.
I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of like this. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. If I've got someone in the church that makes their living, for example, being a plumber,
Hmm.
I would never ask them to come over and do plumbing for me without telling them I'm having you over, not because I'm expecting a cut rate. Uh,
Yeah.
I want to pay full price. I just want to have someone I can trust.
Mhm.
And so I think because of that, we don't want to take advantage of someone. But in talking to you, they're actually not probably substituting that for a doctor appointment, though they might be.
Sometimes,
Sometimes they might, yeah.
and when they do that, I will say, I don't want to step on your physician's care.
Right,
And I will say, very often I'll have opinions, but I'll say, you need to listen to
right,
what your doctor's saying.
yeah,
But that's up to me to be wise about that.
right. But just in reassuring people, I just know, some of the questions I have, I'm probably not going to go to the doctor with.
Right.
It's just there are people like me that are hypochondriacs. And so they'll read an article and develop a pain. And so just to bounce something off of you and get a quick answer on that's a lot better than running to the
Well, and
doctor.
I anticipate I'm saving your doctor some time in the waiting room by answering some of those questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I just look at people like you as an inspiration because I really admire what you do.
Hmm.
I mean, a fourth of the New Testament was written by a doctor,
Right.
Luke, and Luke Acts. I even counted the words once with a computer, but it's a fourth of the New Testament.
Hmm.
And so I just naturally have an interest even that way in what Luke was all about and what he did.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he did as a doctor with people.
He he was in the ministry too, though. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's a question that very often stumps people. I'll say, "Who wrote the most of the New Testament?" And they'll
mhm,
always say Paul, and I'll say, "Nope, Luke did."
yeah, yeah. The total content of it, it's long. I'm reading through Luke right now.
Uh-huh.
and it's a long book.
It is.
So, anything else in the presentation that I did that produced a question, or a question that you think somebody else might ask? Or
I do know that when we get to end of life issues,
Mhm.
even medical people have trouble dealing with that sometimes.
Right.
And it's not something, some people have to be very prepared for it. Other
Mhm.
people, they just put a shield up and they avoid it, even in their jobs.
Right.
And you probably realize, if you've reached the age of Medicare now,
Right.
that one of the things we have to do when we do a welcome to Medicare test
Right.
exam is talk about end of life issues.
Right.
Uh, but some people still are not
Comfortable with it.
they're not comfortable doing that. So talking to medical people, what do you have to say, having been through that, about what does not make you uncomfortable?
Well, I'm one of these guys. I'm a bottom line guy,
Mm-hmm.
and I just want to know what the truth is.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, okay, is this going to kill me? Is this going to do this or whatever? So I want an answer to it. Some people really don't. Some people are so afraid of talking about it,
Yeah.
but that's one of the things that I've covered in the series. It's not morbid. And
Right.
so when I called my family together initially, thinking I might well die, we talked about, okay, here's what to do to help my wife out with the immediate stuff. I got long range stuff all written out on the computer and printed out for her. But I basically didn't find that morbid. I told my grandkids, I want to teach you how to live, but I need to teach you how to die too. And I want to die well. I pray about that. I want to die
Mm-hmm.
well.
Yeah, I think it's good to remember. It helps me to remember to talk about hard things, and this is true in life,
Hmm.
is serving people.
Right.
It's not about, well, I can't do this because I'm not comfortable. Well, in some sense, that doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, what can help you?
Right.
And in talking about death, doesn't make people uncomfortable.
Hmm.
I think people generally welcome. Every once in a while, you'll come across someone who says, "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know. I want to be hit by a car with my back turned to it. I don't know it's coming."
Yeah.
The majority of people don't deal with the end that way. We think a lot about the end of our life,
Right. Yeah.
especially as we age.
Yeah. Especially as we age, it's reality.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question. I mentioned in the presentation that, of course, being happy as a medical worker helps other people and
Mm-hmm.
encourages them. It really does a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other side of it, though, I don't know how much input you can give on this. You can't be like Teresa's gynecologist back when our son was born. He's nearly as old as you, but because he would cut you off. If you gained too much weight, he'd drop you.
Hmm.
You get in trouble for that today. But as far as diet and exercise and keeping your body in good condition as a deterrent, preventative medicine, uh, what do you say, and how much can a doctor say to someone about that part of their health?
To be honest, I say that to almost every patient, because to almost every patient it applies.
Mhm.
Um, I was just in the clinic yesterday, and a person was uh, talking about their father who had died early of a heart attack, and he was very concerned, and he expressed that maybe he was too thin. And I
That's a rare problem.
he wasn't. I was looking at him. He was athletic, I could tell, and I found out as we talked that he had played sports, and he was still working out. And I said, not heard that much, and that could be a problem, being too thin, if we were aging and losing weight or something, like I said. But that's generally not a problem. I probably talk about weight and exercise to, I would say, 80% of my patients. And in some ways, I've got to be honest. In hearing your presentation there and the words you were sharing, I thought, there aren't a lot of people that approach life this way. I wouldn't say you're a rarity, but you're not the majority.
Mm-hmm.
And the vast majority of patients are overweight and they don't exercise at all.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to talk about it. I mean, we're in some ways held we, uh, you might be aware of this. Some people are, that we're really held to quality metrics on that we're doing the right thing, that we're getting success in helping people with their blood pressure,
Mm-hmm.
or if they're diabetic, helping people with their control. We're not held to metrics on people's weight, but to deal with blood pressure, to deal with things like diabetes, people have got to be addressing that. So we have got to do that all the time. We've got to talk about it all the time. Now, I try to be, well, I sit here overweight, which, thank you for putting me on camera to do, to be a medical person saying, physician assistant, heal thyself. But I try to be sensitive, and I try to think, how would I want someone to talk to me about this? Because some people are insulting, but that we obviously, as a Christian, know that's not the case. But it's we have to talk about this, and we've got to address this is a real issue in your life, and I people can decide not to deal with it.
Sure.
And I can't guarantee they're deciding to die earlier, but there's a possibility they're deciding to die earlier.
Right.
And I talk about having a long life with their spouse. And I this is the one that always hit me, is seeing their grandchildren get married.
Mm-hmm.
I say, would you like to see your grandchildren get married?
That's good.
And if you're going to have to probably work on some things if you want to see that granddaughter of yours get married someday.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my next question. How blunt can you be? I'm a preacher, and you've heard me many times. I'm very blunt. How blunt can you be? Now, that illustration right there is would grab your attention. But how blunt can you be to someone about, if you don't do thus and so, here's where this is probably going to lead? How direct can you be?
I think you have to be as direct in the way that's best to get their attention. If people are overweight, they know they're overweight.
Sure.
If people don't exercise, they know they don't exercise. There's people right now listening to this are like, oh yeah, I need to get up and run in the morning or walk or something like that. And I would say the vast majority of people live with that sense, I need to do more, I need to do better. Interesting. I'll share this from the point of view as me as a patient. In 2018, I have been having a series of TIAs.
Yeah.
Transient ischemic attacks. That's like a little stroke that isn't permanent.
Right.
Until one day I had a stroke in April of 2018. It wasn't big. It took them a couple days to figure out it was a stroke. But what made it a stroke was it left a permanent scar that was seen on an MRI in my brain. And I haven't had any deficits from it that I know. Of course, some people would hear me talking and see my memory as I age and think, oh, you do have problems. But I don't think that's it. I'm just getting older. But the biggest impact in my life was how it scared my wife.
Yeah.
And recently I had a sister that challenged me. And then she apologized for challenging me later. I says, no, I'm grateful for that challenge. She said, you need to listen to your wife. It means a lot to her.
Right.
Of serving her by alleviating her fears. And I think that's something that can get us. A lot of times we're magnanimous and so, well, it doesn't matter. If I go, I go. But that means something to our family.
Right.
And I think it means a lot to think about our family and to help the patients think about their families.
Right.
That if this doesn't matter much to you, what does your wife think? What do your children think?
Yeah.
What would you do for your children?
Right.
And maybe that doesn't work. A lot of people, it doesn't. I think a lot of people don't do this because they don't think they can do anything about it.
Yeah.
They've tried and they quit. But one thing you can do is not just pointing out their needs, is to remind them and remind them of the simple things they can do to help. You talk about walking. That's a great example.
Okay, Mike, we're going to have you on the next session as well. So we'll get some more questions on that one. But the thing that I would like for us to remember as we close out here from his own example, and that question he had about seeing your grandkid get married, let me say that I hope that those of you that are watching this will ask the right questions of yourself about your exercise, your eating, what you're doing to your body, taking care of it. It's God's temple. That's what he calls it. And you want it to last as long as it can and affect the most people possible. And certainly you want to do it for the sake of your family. So, Mike, thank you so much for reminding us of some very convicting things that we needed to hear. It's been great to have you. Look forward to the next session when we get to talk some more.
Thank you, Gordon.